Public Works Committee will come to order. We have a general agenda and consent agenda items. Are there any of the consent agenda items that need to be pulled for discussion?
C5.
I had the same ones.
C5, anything else?
I'll move approval of the ballots.
Second.
All right, discussion. If not, those in favor of approving C1 through 4 and C6, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? That's unanimous. Let's go to C5, please.
Item C5, information regarding contractor self-performing work.
Mr. Kerr.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, as you recall, last month you had an individual who came and spoke to the committee about his concerns that under city policies, as he perceived them, the contractors were allowed to self-perform work and therefore did not have to meet the MWBE requirements of the city's policy. As we researched it, we found that that is not a city policy, it's state statute that mandates the allowance for contractors to self-perform work and therefore not have to comply with the MWBE requirements of city policy. Recall that MWBE is a minority subcontractor program or a minority and women subcontractor program. Fundamental issue is that it is a subcontractor program. If a contractor, prime contractor, chooses to self-perform all work, there is no subcontractor involved, and that's why there is no MWBE element. And the city attorney has researched it and can provide any additional information you need on the legal issues. But we did confirm this with both Assistant City Manager Page as well as Attorney Carmen.
Thank you. Ms. Carmen, do you have anything to add? Thank you. Mr. Montgomery.
Yes, in understanding, if the contractor conducts all the work themselves, self-performs, is there any ability for us as city to examine more closely in terms of the award of the contract, the makeup of the contracting organization, in essence, in terms of if they're going to self-perform, and part of the MWBE reasons that those goals are there are in an effort to ensure that there's opportunity for all businesses to have some type of connection within the contracts that are there. But if an individual company decides to self-perform, that work is done in-house, and thus is there anything that can be done to have a look at the makeup of the organization as a part of the awarding of contracts that they're going to self-perform? Because if I understand the way that just reading the language as the statute presents here, I understand it, and it's kind of pretty straightforward in what's there, and I don't know if the current legislator is even willing to take a look at this language and the way that this language is there. Their actions have been actually much more open in terms of allowing contracts to be more flexible, and so I'm not sure if they'd be willing to constrain, but it is a question that I'd like to pose to them, because I just think that if more, and as it seems and as the conversation is going, if more are self-performing, then that does strain the subcontractors and the work that they're able to perform, particularly in what appeared to be a specialized area, and more so in the city, county, utilities areas of work where this has been seen. And so the question I do ask and wonder about is, how much do we see this in other areas of contracting? Because I know primarily the person who came to speak was talking about contracting and contracts that were coming out of utilities and some of the utility type work that was being done.
The answer to the second question about how much do we see it is that until 2 months ago, we hadn't seen it at all. It was very, very rare. Occasionally. Self-performing. I think we may have had one instance in the entire city that I was aware of before that one. But in the last 2 months, we've had 3, as I recall. So it's, I think, a function of contractors responding to the current market conditions and their difficulty with getting subcontracting prices or other factors. It has become more prevalent in recent months than any time in the past.
the demographic, whether both in the form of gender and race, I know in terms of if we look at both those are areas in which that are looked at under MWBE in terms of women-owned business, and then the racial minority status of employment and makeup within the organization.
Mr. Clark?
I was just going to be sure that we send this to the gentleman that was here. It sounded like, Mr. Turner, this kind of comes and goes.
Like I said, it's just become more prevalent. I hadn't seen a lot of it at all until recent months.
I think it may be just the opposite of what you are. I mean, if I can do the work in-house and I choose to farm it out, I'm basically giving it to my competitor if I can do it and he can do it. So it may be a question they don't have enough work and therefore can handle it all in-house. But I'm not in this business, so I don't know how big it is.
All right, so this is an information item, and Mr. Montgomery has requested some additional information, which will come back to us in the future. Thank you very much. That's C5. Let's go to the general agenda, please.
Public hearing on proposed street renaming of Wakefield Court to Aspen Place.
Thank you, and I believe, Mr. Turner, you're going to present?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is a public hearing, and we will just have a brief presentation. There is the neighborhood around the Wake Forest area where a number of the residents have been using the proposed new name for the streets for some time. There is a confusion because of the official name versus the active name, if you will. The staff from the addressing group with the county has looked at this and is recommending the active name be the official name. Staff from the city concurs and therefore recommends the change.
All right, so the proposal is to change the name Wakefield Court to officially make it Aspen Place.
Correct.
And we have a public hearing scheduled. Let me open the public hearing and ask if there is anyone who would like to speak on this matter. Seeing none, I will declare, yes? Please, you're welcome.
I'm sorry, your homeowners at Aspen.
Hey, please, if you would be so kind, come forward to the mic, give us your name and address, and let us know what you think, please.
As they're coming up, Mr. Chairman, we have 3 property owners from the area who are here on that row.
Right.
And so I explained to them before the meeting that we didn't anticipate that there was going to be particular issues with this, but they were certainly welcome if there were any issues that came up to get them answered by the committee.
All right. Basically, my assumption is, given the staff recommended and the residents are not objecting, it's going to slide on through. But if you have any other opinion on it,
None.
Anyway, would you give us your name and address?
My name is Mary McClure, and I've been original homeowner of Aspen Place.
All right. And
I-
the address is?
502 Aspen Place.
Thank you. And would you approve of this change?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You got to get on TV. Well done.
We appreciate you coming, taking the time to participate. Thank you so much. Unless someone else would like to comment, now I'll declare the public hearing closed and ask the pleasure of the committee.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? If not, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? That's approved. Now, Ms. Carmen, my recollection, and I always have trouble remembering this, the committee has been delegated the authority to make this action. So this is the final action.
This is the final hearing.
Final hearing.
City council makes the final decision.
All right, now that's what I was asking, and I got a nod. So I always have trouble remembering. So it will go to the city council for final approval, but since it's not controversial, I anticipate that the approval there will be as well. Thank
You can go ahead and order your new station.
They have to change their driver's licenses?
Thank you so much. Y'all take care. Have a good evening. It comes up like twice a year, and I always have trouble remembering whether we do it here or whether we do it at the council. Okay. Item G2, please.
Item G2, resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Kimley Horn for professional engineering services for the downtown parking analysis.
Thank you. Mr. Turner.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, last month we brought you some information on the consultant that was recommended for doing this traffic engineering study. It does fall under the category of professional engineering services. Therefore, we use the process of selecting based upon qualifications as opposed to low price. And we also provided you some information last month on the total scores that each of the various consultants got. There was a question from the committee on the fact that since scores were fairly close between the top point getter and the second top point getter, whether we could provide some additional information on how those scores are arrived at. You can see the scoring sheet as part of your package. I've highlighted those areas where the top score getter was not the category top score getter, and where the second, the top score getter, was not the top score getter. So the bottom line is we wanted to show you the reasons why the points were different. In essence, the second top score getter was a local firm and therefore got a lot of points for being within a close proximity to the work site, which is one of our grading criteria, and it gets 20 weighted points on our 100-point scale. The top score getter was a company much further away, got more points in other categories, and that is why they ended up being the highest point score getter.
And so the resolution is Forrest would award the contract to the top point getter.
That is correct. That's staff's recommendation.
And that is staff's recommendation. All right, questions? Mr. Clark.
To the attorney, we do not have prices, so that's not an issue here. If we did not award this to the person that scored the highest based on our staff's procedures and analysis that was specified ahead of time, would we be setting ourselves up for any type of liability there? Yeah.
Unless you can show there was some deficiency or issue with staff's analysis, and right now, I'm not aware of any. I had a conversation with Greg about an analysis in the report, and I don't really see a specific basis for deviating.
Because it's my understanding the reason money is not involved at this point is that we're supposed to pick the best. And we delegated and staff set up this procedure years ago, I guess, or a year or so ago.
About a year ago, modified. It's been a process that we've used for years, but we modified it last year to address concerns of council about bond project contracting work or consulting work.
So it's been around a while. So yeah, I'm just concerned, and you've answered my question, that if we were not to go with this, we might be opening ourselves up there.
Other questions or comments?
One, Justin, you can provide this in between before now and Monday, but with the other scorings in which we've used, particularly Davenport as a contractor, as they actually want to receive services, it'd be interesting to see how they scored on those applications.
For others that they proposed or others that they won?
Both.
Okay. And one of the other points I should make is the consultant who was the highest score getter did want to make the committee aware that Davenport was a major component or a major sub-consultant on their work. So you probably saw that in the information provided.
Is there a motion?
I would prefer to go locally, but I think we have rules and we follow them, so I will make a motion we approve.
Okay. Is there a second? I'll second. Discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstention. 2, 4 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstain. Moves forward to Monday evening general agenda. Thank you very much. Item G3, please, is traffic calming policy review. Mr. Turner and Ms. McCullough, if you'll come up. This, as we will all recall, it came up in discussion last month during consideration of a neighborhood traffic calming plan, and I restated an objection I made previously, expressing concern over the increasing frequency with which we're getting traffic calming plans that are essentially composed of vertical components, speed bumps, speed humps, variations on in-street vertical tools, and a concern that in my opinion, that's not good policy. So the material in the traffic book, in the committee materials book, essentially restates the most recent set of policies that, as amended, which address the process for neighborhood consideration, but do not address the substance of the matters laid out for neighborhood review or the relative weighting of alternatives. I have suggestions that I would like to raise for committee discussion, but are there any suggestions or points of comment or analysis from staff before I do that?
No, Mr. Chairman, all we wanted to do with the memo was set the framework, lay the groundwork, if you will, for what the committee has done recently regarding the policy. As you summarized, there is concern from a couple of committee members, council members, about traffic calming devices of a certain type in their wards. I know that you and Councilmember Clark have both expressed concerns about the vertical displacement traffic calming devices. And so those speed humps, okay. So those devices have been addressed somewhat in some revisions. As I recall, there's also a provision that if the council member of the ward objects to the particular type of device, then the staff will look at other alternatives. But we did not give you any proposals, honestly, because we wanted to see what the committee wished to do, and if we get some direction, then we'll bring something back that modifies the policy to address those comments, and then you can vote on those.
I mean, I understand there are professional engineer differences of opinion on the pros and cons. When this policy was first adopted, the DOT director was Stan Plants, and Stan did not like speed humps in the street, essentially, and so his staff effectively never made that recommendation. I got used to that. I agreed with the analysis there. Mr. Coley, you're clearly more open-minded on that question, or perhaps you have simply a different substantive analysis of the pros and cons. I'd be interested in hearing your candid thoughts on it.
I think that,
And this is not rehearsed, so I really don't know what you're going to say.
from my perspective, I think that speed humps or speed lumps do work. I'm not opposed to them, and I try to encourage my staff not to push one item over the other, but to present all of the traffic calming measures that are available and let the neighborhood decide. That is the true intent of the policy. So that's the approach that we take. And we share with the neighborhoods if they are in your ward or in Councilmember Clark's ward. We do share with the neighborhoods that you all are typically not in favor of those measures, but we truly try to leave it up to the neighborhood to decide.
Okay. I guess I don't disagree with you that they work if by work you mean that they make people slow down right before they get to the speed hump. My analysis is that their adverse impacts are such that I have a hard time imagining a situation on a public street that I would recommend a speed hump. My thinking behind that is that they do slow down emergency response vehicles. If you design them so that police cars can get through and the ambulances can get through without slowing down or having to hop over it, then any car coming through can aim for the cuts. So the pillows are designed so that the wide track vehicles like the fire trucks can get through the holes, and even they have to slow down and aim, for it. The noise effects, the fact that you are in many cases simply changing when and where vehicles are speeding. The non cooperative driver, the problem driver, is going to floor it between the speed humps, and then they're going to brake sharply, going to make a big bump and racket going over it, and then they're going to floor it again. And the only way to to reduce that behavior is to put in so many of the doggone things that you've got almost a situation like on the freeways when you get off to the side when you're not supposed to and you go down the street. I suspect that they devalue property values in the neighborhood. Certainly, we have, and this is more anecdotal. We've heard of situations in other cities in which they're put in, and they're permanent structures. They're costly to remove, relatively, and neighbors are immediately asking that they come out. And finally, whereas we ask the immediate neighborhood that's asking for them to vote, anyone that is using this as a legitimate travel area, from one neighborhood to another, as is often the case, don't get a say. And so when they start to encounter it in the other areas, they're inconvenienced and aggravated there, and they say, well, why can't we get it over in our area? So it tends to metastasize to areas. If I had my way exclusively as a policymaker, I would eliminate them from our book of options. I know that is not a consensus position. But I would like to propose for consideration an amendment to our policy in which we officially discourage vertical measures on public streets and officially promote alternatives, and that we make the police or fire analysis a dispositive factor. That is, if we get a negative analysis from police or fire department on putting them in for public safety reasons, that be a bar. Then we under the policy, not bring them forward. And I'd throw that out for discussion and invite colleague comments and alternatives. Mr. Clark.
I don't like them either, and that I have not voted against all of them. I typically look at the neighborhood. In this case, it's 70%. We approve this. If 70% of the neighbors want something, I typically go, and the council member for the ward wants it. I think they're bad for the neighborhoods. I think there's other ways to do it, and I think they really do devalue a neighborhood. Why would anyone want to buy it in a neighborhood? If they see the speed bumps, they go, obviously they say people speed here, so they don't buy it. However, I do not like Mr. Bessie's proposal because I think it directs staff with a set opinion, and I really want staff to meet with the neighbors and work with them. But I do think it's a valid point that we could bring back when we do have these, what police and fire's opinion is. And that could certainly be one of the many variables that I would look at on my vote. But, by the way, have we ever surveyed, actually I have two questions. Ms. Carmen, if we put in speed bumps, or whatever these things are called, vertical traffic calming, and then we took them out and somebody was killed because someone was speeding, would we be liable because we have?
I wouldn't think so. Because you took them out?
Uh-huh.
I wouldn't think so.
Because we put some signs in one time, traffic signs, that I wanted the neighbors wanted removed, and I said we can't remove them because it was highlighting a potentially dangerous curve, and the concern was if we took them out, someone got killed.
That's a dangerous curve, but the speed bumps are just put in because people just simply want folks to slow down. I mean, I don't know that it necessarily means that because you're taking them out, you're not alerting them to a dangerous situation. To me, I see a difference between the speed bump versus a sign about a dangerous curve.
Last comment. Have we ever surveyed folks after the fact to see if they like it?
We had one neighborhood, I think, that actually, when we put them in, we put in temporary measures. And when we put them in, they were too aggressive, and we had the neighborhood respond, and we respond negatively, and so we responded to that. What we typically advise the residents that have complained, and they're not very frequent, is if you are then wanting the council to consider removal, then you have to go through the same process.
Yeah, okay.
But
Thank-
as far as sending out a survey, no, sir.
Not asking you to. Okay, thank you.
The other point I would make too, Councilmember Clark, is that, I mean, speeding is a violation of law. I mean, they shouldn't be speeding anyway. And I assume that the speed signs, limit signs are posted, you're still supposed to abide by those regardless of whether or not the speed humps are there.
Understand.
Unlike the curve. So I do think there's a difference.
Okay, thank you.
One other thought that I forgot to mention is the speed bump or variation thereof is almost always the first thing that's asked for, because that's what everybody's familiar with. That's what you hit in the grocery store parking lot everywhere.
Freeway has them everywhere.
And yeah, so that's what you think. That's what the sort of the layperson thinks of. And that's the first thing they ask for, and it's the simple thing. You know people are going to slow down to at least a degree for that, and when the perception, right or wrong, and often not correct, speeds so to show that people are flying through the neighborhood on a frequent basis, they want the simple solution that they know will make people slow down. And so you can talk about the alternatives, but it's all people hear is speed bump. And so that, as long as it's a level playing field recommendation, that's what we're going to get back in 9 cases out of 10. I think to actually get people to think about the alternatives in a serious fashion, we have to encourage them in some fashion, discourage the simpler, more problematic, easy answer. Mr. McIntosh.
When we choose where we're going to put sidewalks and things like that, we have a matrix that we assign values to. Can we change the matrix or alter the matrix such that speed bumps carry a much lower score in terms of, if 100 is perfect, 0 is terrible, lower the value of that in going into that matrix?
That would be an alternative approach. I don't think we have a numerical matrix. Do we have a numerical matrix?
No, we don't have a numerical matrix. What we present, most times the traffic calming request comes in, and that is the first thing that the neighborhood will ask for. What we try to do is we do share with them the negative effects of the speed bump, the noise, the potential, the fact that our maintenance crews during snow events will not maintain those roads and things of that nature. We share all of that with the neighborhood. We also look at what alternatives are available. Sometimes, depending on the roadway widths and other conditions, it limits the options that are available, but we do present all options to the neighborhood and work with task force to make that final recommendation. But we really try hard not to lead a neighborhood in one way or the other, but try to make them aware of the pros and cons of all of the measures that we present to them that are available based upon their roadway conditions.
But a numerical score?
I mean, it sounds like when we make these decisions, there's a bunch of things that we consider anyway. So it doesn't make sense to try to formalize that and say, in this situation, speed bumps are the solution if they are the only solution. So you would get some points for that. I don't know what the rest of the matrix would look like, but you'd obviously have fire and police weigh in with a score and expected effectiveness.
Mr. McGovern, any thoughts?
I'm willing to support your position. Only question that I do have is just the fact that I don't want us to choose for a neighborhood.
Okay.
And that's the only thing. But I do think, I don't disagree with the fact that it does become problematic to have a neighborhood now who is desiring more in other parts that weren't a part of another part of it because of issues that have been caused by placing them. It's alleviated the issue in one part and caused others in other parts of the neighborhood. And so being able to find methods that don't create residual impacts and effects in the community, I think is a better use of the dollars invested in the neighborhood.
That there are some areas that have more of a sort of an old grid style format, more open neighborhoods, and any measure you put on a particular street tends to direct traffic to two alternatives. So it's going to flow through somehow, and if it's not going on this street, it ends up on the others. If you essentially level the playing field, like a horizontal measure that makes drivers feel that they need to slow down, but they're not having to do the stop and start over the bumps. It's not going to be any faster for them to pull off on the side street. But if they're having to go over the bumps on this street, then they're going to dodge around and go up another street. So it displaces the problem as opposed to solving. Well, let me suggest this thing. We've got multiple opinions on the committee. Can staff do some drafting of alternatives? An approach that essentially says it's the city's policy to discourage verticals and encourage others, and we do give a disproportionate weight to the fire and police emergency response analysis, or an alternative, a numerical scoring approach that incorporates those concerns, but in a broader, and bring us back some alternatives for discussion, and see if we can get closer to a consensus position.
Certainly.
What do you think? A couple of months? Is that enough time? August, or
We'll have to see what your August agenda looks like. September probably better.
why don't we say September?
We gave you all July off.
Because you're giving us July off, you'll have a lot of extra stuff that's normal that you'll want to do. in August.
Oh, what a killjoy! Oh, what a killjoy! Okay.
I could
Thank-
smile when I said it, but it wouldn't look real.
Thank you very much. Then September we'll look at alternative language. We appreciate that. Let's go to agenda item number 4, please.
Item G4, report on potential bike share program.
Thank you. We have a PowerPoint presentation now. Mr. Burzik. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for the opportunity tonight. I appreciate it. What I wanted to do was just give you some information on bike share. It's something that is exploding around the world. There are over 100 programs in North America now. There's some new technology out there that has lowered the cost, which makes it more reasonable for mid-sized communities to consider. In the past, it had been New York, Chicago, Charlotte, larger cities that had entertained this. But now, because of some of the technology changes, it's more accessible. And I've received some interest from organizations within the city about bike share and opportunities for that. School of the Arts has contacted me, Winston-Salem State University has contacted me, and then the organizers behind the Winston-Salem Cycling Classic and the National Cycling Center have expressed an interest as well. So I thought maybe it was time to get everybody up to speed on what bike share is and what the opportunities are. So I'm going to assume that nobody knows anything about bike share. Essentially what it is extension of a transit program almost to provide bikes for short trips, for transportation, and aid in the transportation network, and specifically the transit network. And the nice thing about it is that it's self-serve, so people can reserve bikes, pick one up, bike to a location, drop it off, and it's kind of designed for those kinds of short trips. And the other nice thing is that it's for everyone, so you don't have to be a cyclist to use bike share. You can drive into downtown, but say there's a meeting you have a mile away, you don't want to go into the parking deck, spend 5 minutes getting your car, parking it somewhere else. Instead, you hop on the bike. That mile trip, which could be a 20-minute walk, is a 5-minute bike ride. So it's expanding transportation opportunities for people and giving them some options. So sharing, obviously that's a big part of it. So sharing economy, it's not a bike rental program. So it's not designed to provide a bike for, say, a tourist for a weekend. It's more designed for shorter trips. It could be used for tourism, but it's not meant to take the place of a bike rental program. And as part of the sharing economy, the Uber and Airbnb, how popular those are becoming. Bike share is very similar, except that instead of it being a peer-to-peer sharing like Uber and Airbnb, it's a program that is managed essentially by the city. I like this diagram or this graphic about the sharing economy, that you don't need a drill, you need a hole in the wall. And it's kind of the same with bike share. You don't necessarily have to buy a bike. If you drive downtown, you don't necessarily want to buy the bike, bring it with you, find a place to put it. But if you have access to a bike and it gives you an opportunity to make a short trip to a destination, that's a pretty powerful tool to have then. So in the transportation system, typically it's looked at as something that enhances and addresses the first and last mile of transit trips. So let's say you take a bus into the transit center downtown, but you work at the Gateway YWCA. Again, that's 20, 25-minute walk potentially, but a very short bike ride. So it allows the transit network to reach a larger area. Again, it's ideal for short trips, so it's not intended for somebody to rent a bike and go for a 30-mile ride out in Yadkin County or anything. It's meant to serve relatively dense urban areas. The convenience is ideal, so obviously parking downtown, while there's no shortage, it's not always the most convenient, whereas bike parking, we have bike parking out in front of most restaurants and shops downtown. You can easily get off the bike, put your bike against that rack, lock it up, and be inside in seconds. So it really provides that good, easy access to businesses. And then, I mentioned that it's ideal for transportation trips, but there's no reason it can't be used for recreation and tourism. So, when I've been to Charlotte and used their program, it wasn't because I was getting to work or getting to a meeting or anything. It was just fun to grab one of these bikes, kind of explore the city, and explore that way rather than having to drive everywhere. What it did was allow us to explore more of the city. If we were on foot, we've been limited to a smaller area. So some of the benefits, again, reducing driving trips downtown. If people come to downtown and they park their car, hopefully they leave it there for the day and then they walk or bike, use other options while they're actually in downtown. Again, improving access to transit and some of the city amenities, whether it's the museums, the restaurants, shops, whatever. And obviously with cycling, walking, enabling healthy lifestyles, promoting sustainability, and stimulating the local economic activity. So there was an interesting study done about cycling and walking and how each trip generates less revenue for a shop or a grocery store or whatever it is, because obviously cyclists can't carry as much as if you're driving there. But those trips, if you're on bike, you're more likely to make more of those trips and spend a little bit each time. And over time, that builds up, and actually this study found that cyclists were spending more. And the example that I think of, if I was driving and I'm on 4th Street waiting for a signal, and Camino or any other coffee shop is right there, I can't run inside and grab something to buy. But if I'm on that bike share bike, I can easily walk up on the curb, put the bike against the wall, and go inside and spend some money. So this, while we have cyclists doing that already, the bike share program allows non-cyclists to use that option as well. And opportunity, so why now? Why is now the time for us to kind of consider this and get this, think about it a little bit more? So number one was the new technology. So the old systems were very expensive, very bulky, required a lot of planning, a lot of infrastructure. The new technology has essentially taken the bulky technology that was in a kiosk and put it on the bike. So each bike is now essentially a self-contained GPS unit that tracks where that bike is and manages the whole program. So without going into too much detail about the technology, I can share that later in another report if you'd like to see how it actually works. The advances in the technology have really made it more accessible for communities. Obviously, downtown revitalization with all the activity going on, biking and walking trips make much more sense. Trail construction downtown, so the Innovation Corridor rail trails under construction now. We have the Tiger Grant application in for the Business 40 multi-use path. Imagine the multi-use path connecting Wake Forest Baptist Medical and the Innovation Corridor. and having bike share stations at each end. Faculty, staff, students can hop on a bike, get on the multi-use path, and be between those very quickly. Right now, I know Wake Forest is running shuttles in between. Imagine if we could replace some of those shuttle trips with biking trips. And bike share has a role to play in that. Again, with the races that just concluded last month, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of focus on cycling right now. The National Cycling Center, with the work being done there, and making a world-class training facility in our downtown. The urban population is growing, lots of jobs, lots of visitors. I mentioned the universities, so we have 4 colleges and universities that will be along the Salem Creek Greenway, and they've already expressed an interest in having bike share. And then with the transportation hub downtown, to be able to expand the reach of that hub with bike share would certainly help. So the operations of this, it's fun to use. So just like with much of the sharing economy, that's been enabled by advances in technology. So you can reserve through Airbnb online, on your phone. It's the same with a bike share program. You can identify where bikes are, you can reserve them, you can pay for them all through your phone, and then use a credit card to reserve the bike, and that provides accountability as well. So that's one way to ensure that the bikes don't go missing if somebody's actually tied to it and they're responsible for it. And I mentioned the GPS technology. So previously, the kiosks kind of contain that technology. Now, companies are moving to having that GPS technology and everything else on the bike itself, which makes a big difference. I had a chance to ride one of the bike share bikes, or several of them actually. So the first generation, the old system, that's kind of what Charlotte has, and it works really well. But the bikes are a little bit bulky, they're heavy. The newer technology allows the bikes to be lighter, which is going to be important here because we do have hills. So the lighter bike, it was a pleasure to ride this bike. And you can see on the back rack there, that's the brain of the system essentially. And by having this kind of bike, it has more gears, it allows people to climb up and down hills a little bit more, which would obviously be important here. Again, a little more on the technology. Because you can see that the unit on the back of this bike, that's one example. Because you're not having to plan and invest a lot in the infrastructure, it's easier to expand a system like this. So you can put a bike rack, standard bike rack out, and park 5 of these bikes, and all of a sudden you've increased your bike share system. With the old system, the older technology, you'd have to do a lot of planning, you'd have to do a lot of engineering work to make sure that there was a power connection. The newer technology eliminates some of that. It's also easier to adjust. So let's say we find a bike station that's not performing very well. You can move that from where it's not performing well and move it to a different area. So there's just a lot more flexibility. The other nice thing about the new technology is that there's really no commitment. Previously, you had to purchase all of the infrastructure, all of the bikes. Now, essentially, you can rent the program from a company. And in turn, they take care of the maintenance, the balancing of the system, which means they make sure there are bikes at each of the stations. They handle customer support, promotional materials, and user analytics so we can figure out where people are actually riding. So it removes a lot of the work from the municipality. And then pricing schemes are fully customizable, so you can tailor the pricing scheme to encourage shorter trips or longer trips. So in a lot of cases, you pay $8 for a daily rental. And for each trip you make, the first 30 minutes is free. But after that, you start paying an additional fee. And what that does is encourage shorter trips. But you could change that 30-minute to, say, 2 hours, which would give people a longer range to bike, say, out to Salem Lake and back. So that's fully customizable and could be adjusted to our needs. I hit on the maintenance. One thing it would do with the new technology, the companies that operate that, they hire local mechanics to work on the bikes to balance the system. So there would be a benefit to the community that way. One of the bike shops or a new mechanic would be handling that. And one of the questions that always comes up is always about vandalism and theft. And some research on that. So across fleets around the country, less than 1% of the bikes need to be replaced on an annual basis because of vandalism or theft. So it's really not as big of an issue as you might think it would be. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions. That's just a brief overview, and if there are questions about the technology itself or anything else, I'm happy to do some more research on that.
Mr. Clark?
First off, I do have 3 children that live in large cities, and I know some of them have used it, and I'm going to quiz them since you piqued my interest.
Right.
I think it's a neat idea. The whole concept of sharing economy, I think, is interesting because most cars sit for 23 out of 24 hours a day. So bikes. How many different companies are there out there that provide this?
So the first generation systems I mentioned, where it's probably out of our price range, there's probably 5 of those companies. The newer technology, the one that I'm really interested in, there's probably 3 or 4 right now that are the main competitors.
Okay. And like I know in New York, I think that it's Citi,
Yeah, so
which is the name of the world's largest bank, but I'm assuming they're paying for that
that's right.
privilege to have their name on it. But
Yeah.
typically, would a city do it, or would we simply grant a license to somebody? Because you'd have to set the bike racks up probably in sidewalk right-of-ways or things like that.
Yeah, and that's what's nice about the new technology is that the city isn't actually, what we're doing is hiring a contractor to run the program.
Okay.
Where we wouldn't actually be investing in the equipment ourselves.
Last question. Do you have any information on cities that have our density? Because we obviously, I know my child that lived in Manhattan used it fairly often, but that's 8 million people in something smaller than Winston-Salem.
Yeah, and that's a result of, again,
and there's no hills in Manhattan either.
Yeah, that whole makes a difference.
Very few.
With the newer technology now, the programs are expanding to smaller communities. So I can do some research, but that's what gives me an idea that this could work here, is that it actually is working in some mid-sized communities now.
Sounds
that
interesting.
Aren't quite as dense.
To use one of these bikes, you need a smartphone and a credit card, right?
Actually, any phone would work. So you can actually use a dumb phone and just text to reserve a bike as well. But you do need the phone. Yeah, or a computer.
All right. But you need a credit card.
Yeah, that's right. That's the key.
There's not a cash option.
No, that's right.
Linville team tried a bike share program here in town. I was just wondering if you had any feedback on why that didn't work. I think they shut it down.
Well, so I think probably lack
It's a
of
different model.
accountability. So, I mentioned the first generation bike share. Actually, the first generation bike share was a take a bike, leave a bike program that popped up in a lot of usually college towns where somebody would, you'd leave a bike in a bike rack, somebody else would use it, and eventually they disappear. And I know I saw the Linville bikes as well, and I think because there wasn't that accountability of having a credit card attached to it, there just isn't that
They disappear.
accountability. Now, one thing I have seen, though, is that the Cardinal Hotel is providing bikes for their customers to use. So on the private side, they're trying to account for that already, and I've seen some people out riding those bikes.
Yeah, we authorized the go-kart that goes through downtown, and that's a free service and operates on advertising dollars. I would love to see some sort of a scheme where we could sell branding rights or whatever.
Yeah, and no matter where it is and what program it is, it's always a public-private partnership with this, and there's always some advertising. And the new technology really, you can integrate the advertising into the bike, into the kiosks, wherever you want.
Yeah, I've got the same questions about scalability, whether it works in a town or a size. But if it does, I think it's something that could be very helpful when Business 40 is shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Any alternative mode of getting around downtown will be greatly appreciated.
I had intended to ask about locks, but I saw that. If you want a helmet, you got to bring your helmet.
That's right. So helmets are not provided.
And in North Carolina, for adults, there's no law mandating.
That's right. Just for under 16.
So, are you seeking direction on whether to make inquiries about contracting?
Yeah, I think any advice would be great. I would love to do more research on this.
I would like to see, so let's go to the next step.
I think you have consensus there.
There.
If it were me, I'd say, ask if anybody wants to put in a bid, but, certainly research.
Okay.
Any thoughts on when we would look for you to come back? Yes.
Well, I would ask if, at the point in terms of with the research, if you, at that time, may have had conversations with individuals who would like to put in a bid, that there are options that may be brought for us to look at.
Okay.
At that time, I think that'd be helpful.
Okay.
in what comes back.
Certainly, yeah.
If there's an entrepreneur that thinks she or he can make a go of it, let us know.
Okay.
And when do you think we would look to hear from you?
Be back in September, was that work?
If that's the turnaround
If
that you
that-
think's realistic,
that's-
yes.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem at all.
McCullough will be here then, too.
Great. We appreciate it. We'll look forward to hearing from you and then.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Matthew.
Agenda item number 5, please.
Item G5, review of stormwater fee credit policy concept.
All right, and this was initiated by Mr. Clark earlier and then by the committee as a whole in the context of the airport debate, which at present seems to have been resolved in other ways. They're still in the works, but Mr. Huff, do we have a report?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, as you mentioned, this came from the discussions earlier in the year in April. Basically, the committee asked for some options on a stormwater fee credit policy, a way to incentivize property owners without stormwater controls that are emitting either stormwater volume and or pollution from stormwater runoff to our creeks and streams. Under this concept, a non-single family residential or commercial or industrial customer with a current up-to-date and paid in full billing account could take measures to install either a detention device, which is our larger quantity control structures to mitigate flooding or erosion, or a water quality device, the devices that are geared toward pollution reduction. Those devices respectively could achieve a 25% reduction in the stormwater fee that customer pays. So if they install detention and then they install a water quality device, they could be eligible up to 50% of their stormwater fee. We were recommending that since the impervious customer pays based on a per acre basis, that we allow that fee credit policy to be developed in a way that they could take off that proportional amount, i.e. if they have a 1 acre site and they constructed that stormwater quantity and quality device, then the entire site would be eligible for that 50% reduction. Also, if you had a 10 acre site, but due to topographic constraints, whatnot, you were only able to manage 3 acres through those stormwater controls, you'd be able to take that proportional amount off, i.e. what the device controls is the ratio of reduction. When determining if the credits would be applicable to developer-initiated stormwater controls, i.e. developers that had to comply with our existing post-construction ordinance requirements in Chapter 75 of the code, basically staff went back and did some research. That for your information, is it was approved by council in September of '08. Since that approval time, over 66 facilities have been constructed, and they manage over 10,885,000 square feet of impervious surface area, a lot of impervious surface area. If those facilities were credited based on those allocations that I mentioned, the 25 and 25, it would net a reduction in revenue of $110,784, which would need to be offset by a 1.5% rate increase in the stormwater utility. So that's kind of the concept here, a 25-25, and what's offered in the way of post-construction devices that currently are development controls. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
One other question, one other caution, or reminder, Mr. Chairman. As you recall, as you actually led off with this information, We've talked about this in the context of the airport, and if you use that experience as an indicator of how likely this is to be useful to the development community, what you remember is that the payback on a discount was on the order of 50 to 100 years under that model. So not really economically viable as it would apply to the airport. So obviously something needs to be viable over the financially viable for a contractor or developer if they're going to use this. So it will need significant amount of work to make sure that whatever we come up with as a final recommendation will actually not only be financially or revenue neutral for the city, but will be useful for the development community.
It sounds almost as if you're saying that it has limited prospects as an incentive, but might in fact simply be a reward to entities that had to put in structures for another purpose.
That is correct. Because of the fact that our rate for stormwater fees is comparatively low in relation to the cost of installing a stormwater device, the discount would not be a big benefit from a purely financial standpoint.
Yeah, the economics of it don't work as a volunteer. Correct. Mr. Clark.
Yeah. First of all, this came up during the airport discussions, but I've had this thought on my mind for quite a while. And to me, the first issue that strikes me is an issue of basic fairness. I have two buildings out on Country Club that literally sit beside each other, and one spent a fortune doing what we asked, and the other one is old enough that I don't know if it's got anything. But they're both about the same size lots and whatever. They're both paying the same fee, and that just strikes me as just not right. That one, whether or not, and he had to, I mean, doubt about it, they had to, but they spent a lot more investing in their property for which we get a benefit. Now, as far as the return, I would caution about using the airport as the poster child. That's quite an unusual facility, but I would agree that the returns right now may not make much sense, but if we continue to have more properties come on that get a discount and we raise the fees to compensate for that, over time you may see more people doing something. I don't know if you could take and I can give you, I wouldn't want to give it here, I can just really think about some properties and see what it would take, and I think it's something much smaller than the airport. And the airport's got runways that go, and it was 8 or 10 retention ponds that would have to put in versus, I'm thinking like a strip shopping center or something like that. I don't know, Haynes Mall may be too much of an animal, but I do, they have a very large retention pond below it, so they may be closer to the thing. I like the idea. I think to me, it's a basic equity issue. I think over time, it should generate some return and incentive. And this is one of those cases, I really want people to correct the problem because stormwater is a real problem. And the more people we can encourage to go back and correct, is just that.
Mr. McIntosh.
So on new development, new commercial development, there conceivably is no stormwater fee being, if it's a greenfield project, there's currently no stormwater fee being paid on that at all?
On a non-impervious
Yeah.
parcel, correct.
And so a developer who chooses, well, doesn't choose, he's got to do the right thing. So there's really no punishment to the city to offer that up as an incentive. I mean, if we charge him a lesser rate than we do somebody who's got an existing place, we're not hurting our revenue stream because we didn't have any revenue stream there to begin with. So that would have the effect of reducing the cost of development and potentially encouraging more. I mean, we couldn't use it to subsidize other existing things, but it wouldn't like we'd be taking a net step back.
One of the other, on an equity basis, one of the concerns that was raised by a council member who couldn't be here this evening, Ms. Light, had pointed out that the concept was not noted as available for residential property. And she gave an example. She said she had done a rainwater cistern under her porch, and there was, that was a fairly costly facility, but there was no proposal in this draft concept to account for that. Any thoughts?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We benchmarked a number of communities when we put this proposal forth or this concept forth. And the feedback we got from other communities is what you would typically see in somebody's backyard, Councilmember Lights, a cistern or rain garden, something to that effect. The amount of staff that it would take to regulate those small devices based on the meager yield and reduction, the cost benefit in their perspective wasn't there to go and get into the single-family residential on a lot-to-lot basis to basically chase that, if you will, for the meager return, because the device has to be installed correctly and it has to be maintained. So those devices would have to be inspected on a regular basis to ensure the fee credit was indeed warranted.
So, which is a very real point, but it's still, on an equity basis, what it means is the little guy isn't eligible because it just, of the practical difficulties in making it available to us. Mr. Carter.
Conceptually, I would not have any trouble giving this light or something like that a credit, but it's not much money either way. How about I'm out there on Woodbury Farms and I'm doing section 4 and I'm building 300 homes and I put in current stormwater management.
Yeah.
Would those 400 homes then get a reduced fee?
Well, under this concept, that stormwater control would be a development-initiated stormwater control. So if you did give it to those folks, yeah, we would have to look at that all together, and it would change the concept into residential management, that single-family residential versus, it's a development control under this concept, I guess. They would not be eligible. Just the ones that are paying based on impervious surface acreage versus a tiered residential rate.
Okay, because they're out there putting it in public streets that they can give us streets. Other than that, I don't think that's how much impervious surface they don't put in big parking lots. Now, they may put in a retail area, but that's a different.
It'd be treated differently.
But they've just got the same roofs that single family
Yes, it's
houses.
the same roofs, the same streets.
Roof driveway. Okay. Mr. Montgomery, any thoughts? It sounds like you've got interest from several committee members potentially in looking at a concept. I'm a bit more skeptical myself, but certainly not wanting to try to stand in the door here. You want to do a bit more drafting and bring
Yeah, I think the next step, Mr. Chairman, would be to bring forward some draft resolution language to modify Section 75 of the City Code, which deals with stormwater, and talks about the billing processes.
Okay. What kind of time frame do you need on that?
I think we could have language for that in August.
All right.
It won't be final form because I think we'll want the committee's feedback as to the acceptability, but it'll be in a form that if you decided by some miracle that you just like that particular version, then it'll be ready to go on to full council. But we'll have a draft for you in August.
Snark is out of order.
Yeah, keep this hang around 1 minute. I'm going to give you suggestions on what I think would be typical strip centers where I think I have problems, but maybe we can look at 1 or 2 versus here.
I think it would be smart to talk to the development community as well, just to get their input and see.
In that regard, we probably wouldn't be able to come back in August to give them time to give
Right. I mean, this
feedback
is
to
not
us that
time
would be-
sensitive per se, right? I think we'd do better off getting input up front rather than coming back in and explaining why we did stuff
Yeah,
down the road.
I'd rather give you the input time and bring it back in October, frankly. So,
Okay.
all right. Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll look for this back with some flesh for consideration, for discussion in October.
Keith, that was a meeting where we weren't managed. So somebody wasn't managed.
Yes.
Right. Enjoy it while. Thank you very much. And That leaves agenda item number 6, please.
Item G6, presentation of the downtown streetscape plan report.
Hard place to be on the agenda,
It-
between you and dinner.
Yes. Now, what's the, well, y'all have waited around patiently, so,
We're here just to present an information item on the, basically a proposal for a comprehensive downtown streetscape master plan.
yeah, this is good stuff. How long do you want to?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay, let's go. Thank you.
That's what we're shooting for. 10 minutes here.
It's
Great.
really riveting stuff. But
Right.
Can you do it in
It
10
is,
minutes,
it is. Yeah, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. I told Amy 10 minutes. So basically, this is a recommendation that was in both the legacy comprehensive plan and in the downtown plan update to do a downtown streetscape master plan. Amy Crum from our staff is actually going to be doing the presentation on the report that she's done. She'll talk about really some past planning efforts that we've had and show you a lot of images of existing conditions. You have the report in front of you and you can see those. We think that that justifies the mess that we have in downtown and show you what some other municipalities have done to have a more comprehensive, a more intentional plan for creating a streetscape in their downtown area. And then we'll provide some recommendations for moving forward. We are not asking you for any action at this time. It's something that we'd come forward or that we would ask to include in a future budget and then for a plan and then ultimately probably in the CIP for actually implementation of that plan. This does come forward with an endorsement from both the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership and the City County Planning Board.
Thank you very much. Ms. Crum.
The boundary that we use for this study is shown in gray there. It's essentially the core of downtown with Wake Forest Innovation Quarter, the Holly Avenue neighborhood, and the West End neighborhood, kind of separate from that because they are their sort of own entities. But it's bounded to the north by 8th Street, to the east by Patterson Avenue, to the south by Business 40, and then to the west by Broad Street. In looking at past planning efforts, there's been a couple different plans in the past. They've all either focused on a particular area or a particular aspect of the streetscape. There's been no comprehensive effort undertaken to look at downtown as a whole. When looking at the existing conditions, we really focused on the items that are within the public right-of-way. Building facades do play an important role in streetscape design and feel. However, those are private and they're handled under the Winston Overlay District, so we felt that they should be separate and not included at this time. In terms of limitations, we really took the approach that if we had all the money we could ever want and all the public support we could ever want, what would stop us from doing design? And that would be space and utilities. There's only so much right-of-way to work within, and there are also above-ground and below-ground utilities that we would have to consider. So for existing conditions, we'll start with lighting. Overhead street lighting, there's about 3 distinct types. The first 2 pretty standard, and then you have the wonderful cobras that are attached to utility poles that are sort of scattered throughout downtown. Looking at pedestrian lighting, there's multiple distinct types. They come in different colors. There's silver, there's black with decorative painting on it, and there's also sort of a tan orange color as well. Some of them have 1 luminaire, some have 2, so there's a mix. In terms of trees and vegetation, there's 12 different species of trees throughout downtown. Some trees have shrubbery, some streets have shrubbery in lieu of trees, and some have an addition to trees. About roughly half of the blocks have at least 1 tree somewhere along that block. In addition to the variety of vegetation, there's also a variety of planting areas. Some streets have grass strips. Some have grass strips that are about 1 to 2 feet wide. Some have some that are 4 to 5 feet wide, and some don't have any. There's also planting boxes that are just a mix of rectangular shaped to squares with brick. Some have stone. Some don't have anything. Some have liriope. and so complete mix there. And there's also some planters that have trees. In terms of crosswalks, most intersections have a crosswalk, but some of them are barely visible, which creates a safety issue when motorists cannot see a crosswalk, and neither can a pedestrian, so it creates a safety concern there. There's about 4 distinct types that range in width from about 7 feet to about 15 feet, and you can see there's sort of like the brick motif, and then there's some that are just sort of striped. Sidewalks pretty much exist on all streets in downtown in varying widths, and there's a absolute smorgasbord of materials and patterns present. This shows 12 different types. There's a lot more that aren't shown here. You have plain concrete, stained concrete, concrete with texture, a mix of concrete and brick, all brick, different pavers than brick. So it's a absolute mix, and it can vary from basically within one block across the street. It'll all be different. Benches and trash receptacles. There's about 1 style of bench, which is pretty common through most downtowns, and 2 styles of trash receptacles, again, pretty common that you see within downtowns. In terms of bike racks, there's 2 types of bike racks. There's the standard U bike rack, and then there's also art racks that are downtown. Banners and signage. In addition to just your typical street signage, there's banners that either highlight a time of year or a district, and they are of a standard size and shape, and they're handled through the DOT department. And there's also the Trailblazer Wayfinding Signage Program that was done through the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership that has signage both for motorists and also for pedestrians. Other items that are within the streetscape include the recycling centers, the newspaper kiosk, parking meters, and also public art. In terms of what other municipality efforts, there's different approaches taken to handling downtown streetscapes. Some downtowns, like Durham, basically handle it through their downtown plan. They don't have a separate streetscape plan, but there are those municipalities that do have separate streetscape plans. A couple good ones were the Chapel Hill Downtown Streetscape Plan. This had a design manual for multiple different elements. Some of your trees, your lighting, but also things like nano parks and cultural events were discussed. And also include detailed schematics and a tree management plan. The Downtown Cary Streetscape Master Plan. This one had a street prioritization plan of A Street, B Street, and C Streets, and that was they were differentiated based off of funding for implementation. A streets would be funded through the town, with B and C streets being funded through private development. Greenville, South Carolina's Downtown Streetscape Master Plan. They also used a sort of street typology, and they called it the Framework Plan. They included detailed drawings on improvements, intersections, and green streets, and they had an implementation strategy as well. So our recommendations for moving forward would be to hire a professional design consultant to complete a streetscape master plan that would basically be an intentional approach to design through the creation of standards, and then to set aside funding for implementation over a number of years. So the steps to achieving this recommendation would be obviously gather support. We started that with before the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership and the Planning Board and coming before y'all, but again, to gather support. We recommend a detailed public planning process. That was one thing we saw in all the plans that I looked at, was that a public planning process was undertaken. There's going to have to be some decisions made with the limited right-of-way, and you need that public input to get that support and make those decisions. Funding, obviously that is going to come into play either through CIP or possibly grant funding, and then private development responsibilities. And those would come into play if they were doing something in the public realm. Along the sidewalk, they would have a set of design standards that they could then follow. Sort of a scope for the plan. Obviously, we want all the elements that we talked about in our existing conditions to be discussed, as well as historic preservation, and that came out of the planning board. There's a lot of history within downtown that needs to be recognized and highlighted in some manner. The plan should also anticipate the upcoming changes to Business 40, as well as complement the work of other agencies. It should incorporate the strollway into the streetscape. Right now, the strollway sort of just ends. You just sort of plop out onto First Street and doesn't really give you a good direction as to where to go, and it's a great asset to have downtown, so it should be highlighted. And then to establish a typology of streets, and we recommend that's based off of level activity. There's a really distinct difference between 4th Street and 7th Street and how they're used, and so they require a different sort of design. And we propose a three-tiered model of primary, secondary, and tertiary streets. And the way we look at it, I'll start with the tertiary streets, and these are the streets that are minimal pedestrian activity or sidewalk activity. They're basically connections. They're the streets that front the back of buildings and have entrances to parking lots, or if it's parking lots. People just use them to get from point A to point B. They don't really congregate there. And for that, we would recommend for design would be to have basically focus on safety. Make sure they're safe. Consistent look on sidewalks, consistent lighting, crosswalks, those sort of basic amenities that make people feel safe. And then when you move up to secondary streets, you would start adding things like amenities such as benches and trash receptacles and street trees, because these streets have a medium level of activity. They're mainly offices and government agencies along those streets. And then when you move up to primary streets, this has the highest level of pedestrian and sidewalk activity, or the potential for high levels of pedestrian activity. And they have a range of office, commercial, retail, and residential uses. And this is really where we can highlight and enhance the network and really become the city of arts and innovation with art crosswalks and art benches and a high level of tree canopy, things of that nature. This is sort of our proposal for the different streets. And you can see the primary streets are the dark blue, and they're centered down in the downtown core, 4th and Trade. And it sort of moves out from there to the medium blue, which is secondary, and then light blue, which is tertiary. These are some renderings to give you an idea of the possibilities. They were created by Marco Andretti in our department. This is Liberty and 5th Streets. There you can see the transit center there. And then this is 6th Street, and this is actually looking north on Liberty and 6th. And the reason we chose these streets is right now there isn't any street trees along here. It's a one-way street with the potential to going two-way once Business 40 is completed. So it has a lot of opportunity there. You have activity on the Green Park, which is just north of this intersection. You also have the new cycling center that's coming in along this stretch. So there's a lot of possibility here for doing something really spectacular.
So next steps, as I mentioned, this isn't anything we're asking for any action on at this point. Probably look to potentially fund the master plan in next year's budget, 2017-18, and then the improvements in future CIPs.
Mr. Montgomery.
And just one of the things I did want to point out is that any movement forward on this would be done. Any standards by a consultant would be developed with extensive public input.
Okay, and so what's your time frame for bringing it back as an action discussion?
Probably for funding in 2017-18. At this point, no time frame.
Are there any other action steps that you're recommending at this point?
No.
Okay. Questions, Mr. Montgomery?
Yeah, can you go back to the map? Yep, two things. Part of my challenge on this is, and I've had conversations with city manager and others around streetscape, is the absence and exclusion of this part of downtown. In the downtown plan, this part of the community is therefore designated and considered part of downtown. And in the new plan, that was one of the additions that happened. And we talked extensively about what's taking place around Martin Luther King and streetscape improvements and the lack of connectivity around streetscape around 34th and 5th Street. And I think that with what we have an innovation quarter in the streetscape to have there, by neglecting that, we still cut off the streetscape pieces that connect those parts of the community. And for me, I think that's a necessity to include in the plan in terms of 34th and 5th Street on this way on the connectivity that we create in the streetscape. I think that's a major opportunity for us to include.
Certainly, I think it's something that we need to think about, perhaps in the East End plan that I'm hoping we're going to be coming forward with. that some of these components could be included in that. But certainly, I mean, we would have to, if we're going to extend to this area, we probably need to look at the connections in some of the other ways, but certainly I agree with the need to provide that connectivity at 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and would not want to eliminate, you know, would not want to do anything in this that kind of furthered that issue.
So for me, when I look at it, I see a focus primarily on the core of in the central city area without any consideration of that. And that's just for me that for me in terms of looking at a plan, we'd have to look at how all that blends together for me. That have to be consideration.
Right, and this is intentional, focusing on that downtown area, but I hear what you're saying, and I think then we need to consider how we link to adjacent areas, particularly the east area.
But in not a sense that the downtown, in terms of the downtown plan, specifically expands what it considers to be downtown in terms of the parameters of what we look at in the downtown plan, which intentionally, from my understanding in the conversation, is that it intentionally went out further east within what's mapped out and what's pictured there. And so with Innovation Quarter piece, they've taken care of much of the streetscape components. And so for me to leave that part out kind of leaves it hanging on its own.
How far east do you?
From 52 to MLK.
Yeah, I'll have to bring forward the downtown plan and to incorporate that. It's yeah, in the currently adopted downtown plan, it does not go over to there. In the currently adopted downtown plan, what it does is it identifies adjacent neighborhoods, and including West End and some area even south. So certainly we could do a streetscape plan that included those extended areas, if that's your direction.
Another option might be to look at a streetscape plan for the Innovation Quarter, since the area you're describing is composed of that, as I understand it, and see whether a compatible or consistent plan could be developed for the quarter, along with that's consistent with the downtown plan.
Let me make sure that we understand what Councilmember Montgomery is suggesting now. Are you talking about MLK on the north side and 52 on the east side? Or are you talking about extending substantially further east than 52 at that point?
Well, I'm saying going from intentionally what is done there in terms of skipping through Innovation Quarter because they've already established.
Right. That is why they are not included, is because they have their own current streetscape plan.
Right. And picking up from 52 to MLK.
To MLK, where it curves south, essentially.
Right.
Okay, that's a big jump.
Well,
that's a big jump.
No. Well, what I'm thinking in my mind is about 4 blocks of space, 4 or 5 blocks from 52, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Street to the top at MLK, at Mars Hill, and Burger King.
Do you think that as part of the East End plan that we could do it in that?
I think what we have to do, Mr. Chairman, is just take a look at it, bring something back, show the committee what the implications would be of expanding to that area.
Okay.
It is a while, guys.
Can you take over for a minute?
Yeah, but I think
Only a year.
Yeah,
Mr. McIntosh and Mr. McGovern.
to me, the terminology of whether it's downtown or East Winston really isn't so important as the fact that it's done in consistence with the rest of what we're doing. And it's not all going to be, we're talking about establishing criteria and look and feel of what's going to be done over a period of time. Sure. And I can remember there was a lot of controversy about extending the street trees and the streetscapes east of probably Main Street. There was a lot of wrangling over that, and it turned out to be a great decision because we're now benefiting from that, having mature trees down there and things that were. So I think that opens up lots of opportunities, signals that that's an area of growth. So having that consistency and what plan is called, I don't know that I get so hung up over that, but I think it absolutely needs to be
Well, for me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but for me, it's just the sense of the concurrency of what's there. For the fact that, as it even stands now, and I've mentioned this to the manager and to other staff, that the dramatic differences that we have in terms of connectivity, whether we're looking at it from a development standpoint or we're talking about just along the streetscape, immediately shifts. And to be able to have something that goes that consistency for what we're going to spend in terms of the dollars we're spending around MLK and the streetscape improvements there, we totally lack anything in between those.
No, I wasn't necessarily speaking against it. I'm just saying that it was a big jump. And so, that's more than 4 or 5 blocks, isn't it?
We'll have mega blocks.
Okay, you got
Right,
big
that's
blocks.
100, right, right.
But, I mean, yeah, I would say when you come back asking for a consultant study, you may need to
Right.
incorporate.
Right.
Okay.
And perhaps we can have some conversation in between then about maybe incorporating some of this into that potential East End plan, which I would hope we're moving on more quickly.
Okay. Other comments, questions? All right, thanks very much for the presentation, very useful, and we look forward to the next step. Mr. Turner, is there anything else this evening?
No, sir.
All right, then, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.